Taven and Daegon. Now you'd be forgiven for not knowing who either of these two Mortal Kombat characters are. Perhaps you saw some references in modern MK endings, maybe in-game MK11 gear or something. They currently only live on via these little nods to their existence. However, once upon a time in the late 2000s, these two characters were, at one point, a vital part of the MK story, and even had a game dedicated to their journey. That game was Mortal Kombat Armageddon, which released in 2006, 2 years after Deception. The thing is though, Taven and Daegon were really important to the game's Conquest mode, which was the single-player adventure component. But although Taven himself is the entire game's main character and leading protagonist, most modern fans don't even know who he is, and even those that grew up with Mortal Kombat in the 2000s timeframe probably don't really remember how Taven and Daegon played at a high level. So today's video pays tribute to the two half-gods, the sons of Argus and Delia, who undertook a quest that would decide the fate of the world in the Battle of Armageddon. So we'll look at their beginnings, a deep dive into their gameplay, and also discuss, in my opinion, why these two are almost lost in time. So let's get stuck in. I want to give some quick backstory for the two of them before we start with the gameplay. Now, I don't usually cover lore on this channel at all really, but it makes sense for this one. Years before Armageddon, Taven and Daegon were both sealed away in rock. The purpose of this was for each of their dragon guardians to awaken them when Armageddon drew near, setting them both on a quest to save the realms at the same time. Throughout the game, Taven's dragon, Orin, acts as a guide and instructs you on where you need to go. Taven encounters many original characters during this journey, but it all starts to develop later in the story when Taven encounters Daegon in the Red Dragon stronghold. But although Daegon is the younger brother of Taven, he's much older, and it's revealed that Daegon is the leader of the organization and had planned on having his brother located and killed. You see, Daegon wants the prize all for himself. This evil turn brought about by the fact that his dragon, Karo, had mistakenly awakened Daegon centuries too early, which clouded his vision of the quest that the two brothers were supposed to undertake. Daegon killed their parents, Argus and Delia, and enslaved Karo to use the dragon's powers to fit his new needs of locating both Taven and Blaze. Now, I'm not going to go any further into this on the off chance that someone wants to experience this story for themselves, but that's the short of how it starts. The two were instrumental to the events of Armageddon. Now that the introductions are put to one side, let's do what we do best, breaking down the gameplay of the two brothers and answering the question of, yeah, they're the main characters, sure, but how good were they? Tragically, and maybe one of the reasons this video even exists to highlight them for once, is that neither of them were particularly amazing in the game's meta. Like, don't get me wrong, there's definitely worse characters in this game, but there's a fair few better than them as well. The two are painfully average, in my opinion anyway. Let's go over Taven first, this time taking a deeper look into the move list and giving an overall impression and then talking about what worked for him and what didn't. His hand-to-hand is decent. Nothing screams over the top or incredibly powerful, which unfortunately you do need a few of those attacks in this game to be really good, but there are a few key buttons here that allow Taven to play 3D MK the way you need to. First of all, he has a really simple mix-up of back 2, which is a mid that knocks down, and back 4, which is a sweep of similar speed and range that also knocks down. So automatically there's something here that can keep people on their toes, but neither of the attacks offer much frame advantage, so you need to watch out for their get-up attack potential. You have some pretty okay low pokes outside of back 4, but back 4 is the one you're likely going to use the most because it's fast, goes low to the ground, and it just works really well with the back 2 mid. Mids are essentially an overhead in 3D Mortal Kombat, so that's why there's a mix-up there. Taven sports an impressive standing 1. which doesn't sound like much, I know, but it has fast startup and lightning fast recovery. This means that you can stagger up close with it, but also use it a few extra times in juggles to get more combo damage, which isn't something a lot of characters can actually do in this game. I would say it's comparable to Cyrax and his 1-1 loops, which is by far one of Cyrax's strongest tools. Taven can somewhat use it the same way, as if the opponent is airborne trying to jump out of their recovery, everything that hits you there is unscaled, making this fast standing 1 check a potential path to huge damage for little effort. The 1-1 leads to large-scale combo chains, which, again, when combining his standing 1, can become some very tidy damage. When it comes to combos, Taven's pretty good here. Standing 2 as a mid, 2-3 as a 2-hit from the same button. The hand-to-hand does what you want it to do on a fundamental level, so he's got a nice well-rounded set of options, in my opinion. Now, the weapon is overall quite underwhelming on its own. A lot of the moves are unsafe, they don't lead to much damage that you can't just get with hand-to-hand. However, you have some decent launches that lead to Taven's biggest practical combo damage. So if you're looking to parry someone, which is a stun mechanic exclusive to Armageddon, you can stay in hand-to-hand and simply swap to the weapon mid-parry recovery, so if the parry works, you have this really good back-to launcher ready to go. Standing 3 recovers fast as well, so like the hand-to-hand standing 1, you can get a single hit here after a launch for some extra damage. So once again, the combo side of Taven is actually quite nice. Taven as a whole is a hand-to-hand primarily, but the weapon in certain situations like parry or combo damage. One thing that's really good for Taven is that all of his special moves are pretty damn good. First of all, he's got a basic projectile, but it recovers nice and fast. It is basic, sure, but it's good for what it is. He has a shoulder charge, which is similar to Shao Kahn or Nightwolf, and this move is really fast on startup, so it can be a nice whiff punish in a pinch. A full screen ground pound, which in 3D MK is very powerful, and in Armageddon, stronger still. It works like every other ground pound in the game when you can guarantee it in certain situations, and if you break a combo that has you launched into the air, the ground pound post-breaker is free damage your side. And then finally, a fast tracking charge punch. The tracking on this move is actually ridiculous, and although it's unsafe on block, it recovers really fast on whiff. So using it from full screen to close in distance actually works, let alone cheeky little situations where you'll whiff the charge on purpose and then recover with a parry if they want to try and punish it. Overall, these special moves will play a major part in using Taven effectively, and let's go over his game plan because of that. The overall game plan of Taven is actually quite reliable. Combining his ground pound and fast fireball makes for an effective ranged game, using the shoulder charge to whiff punish or maybe even anti-air, and it means that Taven can be really annoying at distances most characters won't have as many options in, as ranged game plans in general are not hugely common in Armageddon. If up close is somewhere you have to be, he has got decent combo damage and some reliable buttons thanks to his hand-to-hand. When I think of Taven, I think of someone that's well-rounded, but doesn't majorly excel at anything to a broken degree, which unfortunately is something you need to have to be dangerous in this game. But Taven can work, and that is good enough. Now, in my opinion, the same can't exactly be said for Daegon, as he's more reliant on his weapon over hand-to-hand, and is overall a bit more limited in his design. Hand-to-hand is a lot more underwhelming compared to Taven. Things are a bit more unsafe, and Daegon has more limited options. The two characters share the exact same throw animation, which is your standard over-the-head throw that the boss characters have, and this works well for Taven because he's got range, but Daegon isn't as lucky because he's more of a mid-range fighter. Some standout buttons might be considered his up 4, which is a launcher, however it doesn't leave you as much time as you'd want to land his really big combo damage, but we'll cover that in a second. He's got both 1-1-1 and 1-1-2 from his punches, with 1-1-2 stance change acting as a decent damaging weapon branch, which is good because weapon is where you want to be with this character. Unfortunately though, everything else in this stance is pretty underwhelming. His low pokes are, again, kind of generic, but they seem to sport more recovery, which is not a good thing. His down 1 is fast, but mad unsafe on block, so forget about using that, and his low kicks are your standard boring MKA low kicks that don't offer him much. The exception being one of his low kicks, which is one of your faster recovering low options, but it's kind of all that exists. On a fundamental level, the hand-to-hand is good for if you land a launcher, but in the neutral, just not very good at all. Unlike Taven, Daegon's weapon is the main part of his game plan, as it offers better recovery on a lot of moves, and it offers some much needed range that he lacks in his specials and hand-to-hand. Now, his weapon can definitely be boiled down to just a small handful of buttons, but it's enough to build a game plan around. First, 1-1 has mega fast recovery. It feels a bit bugged though, because although you can move immediately after the second hit, you still can't press anything for some time, which results in this being used just for evasiveness and not continued combo damage or pressure, which would have been really nice. The 1-1 can go into 1-1-2-4, which is a 4-hit string that does really nice damage for what it is, and it's a great punish. But the other button is his back 4, which is this kind of spin attack that goes on for a while and does good damage. But the move is really strange and again feels a bit bugged. If the move connects on the ground from start to finish, it's got longer recovery. Now, it's not unsafe on hit, but you're both stuck in place for a split second. However, there are other instances which will greatly reduce the recovery, making it something that's a lot more effective as a poke, especially if you parry cancel first, which gives the button even more range. By the way, parry cancelling is a technique that lets you parry and then instantly press a button, which will cancel the parry, but it keeps that forward momentum. It's really good for these long-range weapon attacks, and a lot of characters will use it. The issue with this back 4 is that it's a high, so the opponent can very much just crouch it. Daegon in general struggles with this because a lot of his moves can be crouched, which is why it's even more important to play a mid-range game reliant on poking and whiff punishing. Up close, he's incredibly easy to disrespect. Another weakness is that he's got a fair amount of parryable gaps. Blocking first and then just getting parried for using one of your more go-to buttons is not a good feeling. Daegon just doesn't feel as refined as Taven, and I don't know if that was due to development time or whatever, but it's extremely noticeable against either other players or even the AI tower sometimes. This does tend to be enforced further by his specials, as they're similar to Taven's, but just kind of worse. For starters, his projectile isn't as good, as it has way more recovery. Plus, he lacks that long range that Taven has anyway, so this fireball isn't as fitting to his game plan. Up close, he does have a shoulder charge of his own, which does more damage than Taven's, and although it's unsafe, he remains crouched in its recovery, so some punishes will actually miss you, which is good. He too has a punch attack special, but his is the same kind of attack that someone like Hotaru has, and it's pretty slow and not that rewarding, so unfortunately ends up being a special that goes relatively unused. And his final special could be good, but the speed slows it down. A rolling uppercut that launches them really high. High enough that Daegon can get close to a 60% combo from it if it hits them, but as you can most likely see for yourself, it has loads of startup frames. Plus, it doesn't track very well. Plus, I've had it to be crouched or low profiled before. You'd think this would work at least after a parry or something, but it's so slow that it's either totally impossible or a very, very tight link. For something that gives Daegon so much needed damage, it's far too slow for what it is, especially as his launches outside of this move are incredibly limited. Daegon's game plan is built entirely around his Drake swords, staying at that magic range where 1-1 works well to poke at them and back 4 can whiff punish or catch a button, but his abundance of high attacks will cripple his up-close game. Even more so that most of his low pokes aren't very good at all, so checking a crouching opponent is not a reliable strategy either, besides that one low kick that doesn't do much damage, but at least it's an okay button. Okay, so if I personally was to rate these two characters with the knowledge that I've amassed over Armageddon across the many years, I would say with full confidence that I would play Taven over Daegon any day. Taven is more refined, a lot more well-rounded, has some of the basic tools that you need to play Armageddon at its basic level, and it's just the combination of screen control and at least a decent selection of buttons. It makes him more of an overall threat compared to his younger brother. Daegon has more obvious flaws in his gameplay, more limited options thanks to how abusable his high attacks are, and even his better options in weapon stance have their significant weaknesses thanks to parry. The reality is, Taven does a lot more than Daegon does, and although Daegon has higher combo damage thanks to rolling uppercut, the move is so underpowered that he doesn't have as many ways to actually get that damage, so it's really not an advantage, in my opinion. This is a weird side to this video, honestly, because usually there is a rather unanimously agreed on tier list for every fighting game, no matter how old it is. But with Armageddon in particular, there was always this absolute agreement of roughly the top 10, and everyone else was always placed kind of all over the place. I've seen a lot of tier lists that I definitely do not agree with as someone who's lived and breathed competitive MK for as long as I have, and even then, no one seems to have a set in stone full tier list for the game no matter what. Some characters are maybe just outside the top 10 in some lists, and they appear as bottom 5 in others. I've had to go into this with more of a personal opinion over how I see it, so please feel free to give me your input if you disagree. It's totally fine. It's worth mentioning that older posts about tier lists are online based, because that was literally the only way people could play against each other back in the day. It's not like the FGC that we have now. Taven, in my opinion, is just a solid mid-tier character. He's got some decent tools, nice variety thanks to his specials, and has some small elements that can make a character good in Armageddon, such as his free ground pound on air breakers, fast recovering buttons for stagger potential, and decent combo damage from said buttons, and a few options everywhere on screen, which is quite rare in this game. Daegon, on the other hand, I would place in the low tier. His weaknesses are right out there in the open, and his strengths definitely do not outweigh those weaknesses. He's underwhelming overall, and could have been better if he just had some better frames on some of his specials. The rolling uppercut being as bad as it is disappointing, because that move on its own could have made him a lot better. But as is, Daegon is living in his brother's shadow in the high level side of this game. The final thing I want to discuss in this video is my personal opinion on why these two characters were so forgotten. Now, I'm sure these characters do have fans. Every character has fans, but considering they were the two main characters of Armageddon, they weren't even used much in their own game, so why was that? Well, first, let me give you some insight from someone who was playing this game when it first launched. This was the first time since MK Trilogy that MK had combined all of the fan favorites into one place, and there'd been so many new characters since then that a roster of 64 characters means that everyone is going to want to play their favorites that they already had. Taven and Daegon were new in this game, but like, if you already had multiple favorite characters and now everyone is in this new game, who's going to play as those new guys? I mean, Baby Ketchup hadn't played Sector in years, and now here is Sector playable in 3D for the first time. I didn't have gold. I didn't even have a Dreamcast. Secondly to that, Creator Fighter was a massively used feature. So now you're taking a already existing list of fan favorites and giving people the chance to make their own characters. And that's just going to drown out Taven and Daegon even more. It didn't help them that on top of neither of them being top tier, which I will be honest wasn't as much of a big deal as Armageddon was only played competitively by select online players who actually had internet set up back then, there's tons of us who played Armageddon with no online and either didn't care or most likely didn't even know about what high-level fighting games were. The issue is, they're both just not very interesting. They're just kind of people that have these fire attacks, shoulder charges, and fireballs. They both have swords as their weapons. This game had no finishing moves behind the custom thing, so we couldn't see any extra personality put into them. In my opinion, the two characters failed to stand out in an interesting way, and with a roster that had this many legendary fighters in it, these two needed to be pretty special to get people to actually use them. And unfortunately, they didn't. Now, I'm always optimistic, right? I love the idea of Taven and Daegon. I loved the conquest mode in this game, but maybe it was due to limitations of the time, the deadlines for the 3D MKs being pretty tight or something, all of the extra content that had to exist. I don't know. But what I do know is that one day, should we see these two ever make a return in a future Mortal Kombat, there's a lot that could be done to make both of them 10 times more badass. We've seen it before, and I'm hoping that we'll see it again. Thank you so much for watching this video. Take care. Support the Patreon if you want to go the extra step. Follow us on social media. Click the like button. All that bloody good stuff. And we'll see you next time. Take care now.